Something just happened in this Bugatti Chiron build that's got people talking, and it's not what you think. Not the rebuild itself, not the custom interior, not even the fact that the car actually came back to life. It's what this rebuild is starting to reveal about the entire hypercar industry and the unspoken rules that govern it. Because at this point, this isn't just a rebuild series anymore. It's turning into a real conversation about how hypercars are supposed to be handled versus what happens when someone decides to ignore those rules completely and do things their own way. And if you've been following this project from the beginning, then you already know this was never meant to get this far. Bugatti didn't think this car would even be taken apart properly, let alone split down to its bare chassis, rebuilt piece by piece, and brought back to life in a garage environment without their blessing or support. But somehow that's exactly what happened. And now we're at a stage where things are getting a lot more serious, a lot more complicated, and a lot more controversial. Because the question is no longer can he rebuild it. That part is already answered. The real question now is should he be doing it this way? And what does it mean for the future of car ownership when someone proves it can be done outside the system? Let's talk about what actually happened in this part of the build, because this is where opinions really start to split down the middle. On one side, you got people watching this thinking this is insane skill, this is dedication. This is what car culture is all about. On the other side, you've got people saying this is exactly why manufacturers don't allow this kind of work, that some cars should remain untouchable, that there are lines you just don't cross. And honestly, both sides kind of have a point, which is what makes this whole thing so fascinating to watch unfold. So first, the car itself. Mechanically, it's already come a long way from where it started. At this stage, the main visible damage left was the gearbox bracket, which had been bent and twisted during the original crash. And here's the surprising part. It turned out to be weldable, not replaceable, not something that required a $20,000 part from the factory. Weldable. And that moment alone says a lot, because for a car like this, you expect everything to be ultra-complex, ultra-restricted, impossible to touch without specialized tools and factory authorization. But then you see parts of it that are actually reparable with the right skill and the right approach. And that's where things start getting interesting. Because the deeper they go into this car, the more it starts to feel like, yes, it's advanced, yes, it's engineered to an incredible level, but it's still built from components that can be understood, worked on, and even recreated if you know what you're doing. And that idea alone, that realization, that's what makes this entire build so controversial in the first place. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Because without official support from Bugatti, everything becomes 10 times harder. Airbags, chassis damage, radiators, cooling systems, all of it has to be sourced independently, repaired through trial and error, or recreated from scratch. And this is where the real test begins. Not just rebuilding, but figuring things out without the manufacturer guiding you, without the manual, without the hotline to call when something doesn't make sense. Take the chassis repair, for example. Instead of replacing the entire front section like a factory technician would recommend, Bob steps in and basically says this is just metal, we can rebuild it, we can make it work. And when you hear that, it almost sounds too simple, like he's underestimating the complexity. But then you watch the process. Cutting away the damaged section, heating the metal to the exact temperature needed, reshaping it with precision, welding it back together with millimeter accuracy, rebuilding the entire structure piece by piece until it's structurally sound again. And suddenly you realize this isn't guesswork. This is decades of experience. This is years of understanding how cars are built, how metal behaves, how forces distribute through a frame, all being applied to something most people would never even attempt to touch. And here's where the debate kicks in again. Because some people see that and think that's incredible craftsmanship. That's the pinnacle of the DIY spirit. Others see it and think that's exactly what shouldn't be done on a car like this. That some things are meant to stay with the people who designed them. Now let's move to something that really got people talking. Something that sparked arguments across every comment section where this was discussed. The airbags. Because this is where things start crossing into uncomfortable territory for some viewers, where the illusion starts to crack just a little bit. So during the teardown, they discover something unexpected. Part numbers, brand markings, supplier codes, clues that suggest something very surprising. The airbags inside this multi-million-dollar hypercar look very similar to ones used in more standard vehicles. And when they cross-reference those part numbers, dig a little deeper, check the databases, it points towards something like an Audi A3 or another vehicle within the Volkswagen Auto Group family. Now, pause there for a second, because this is where the internet starts arguing, where people pick sides and defend their position like their life depends on it. Some people are saying, of course, it's all part of the same automotive group. That makes sense from a business perspective. It's smart engineering. Others are saying, wait, you're telling me a multi-million-dollar car is using parts from a regular everyday car that costs a fraction of the price? And that's the moment where perception starts to shift, where the mystique begins to fade just a little. Because hypercars are usually seen as completely unique, completely separate, built on a different plane of existence. But moments like this show that behind the branding, behind the price tag, behind exclusivity, there's still shared engineering happening. Still parts being pulled from the same suppliers. Still cost-saving measures being implemented even at the highest level. And then comes a decision. Do they trust it? Do they use the airbag even though it came from a different vehicle? Or do they avoid it completely and try to source something else? They decide to go ahead and test it, fit it into the system, run the diagnostics, and it works. It registers correctly. It fits the mounting points. It integrates with the car's safety system. And just like that, another line gets crossed, because now it's not just about rebuilding Bugatti. It's about proving what's actually interchangeable and what isn't, what's truly unique to this car, and what's borrowed from the parts bin. And that revelation, whether people want to admit it or not, changes how you see these cars. It doesn't make them less impressive, but it does make them less mystical, less untouchable, more human. Now, let's talk about the interior, because this part completely flips the tone of the build. Up until now, everything has been technical, mechanical, problem-solving under pressure. But the interior, that's where creativity takes over, where personal taste gets injected into a car that was originally designed to be uniform, controlled, exactly the same as every other Chiron that rolled off the line. And not everyone saw it the same way, because instead of restoring it back to factory spec with the original materials and the original color scheme, they went bold. Purple and white custom leather, unique stitching patterns, a completely reimagined look that screams individuality. And when it was revealed, that's when opinions split again, maybe even harder than before. Some people loved it, said it made the car unique, gave it character, turned it into something more than just another Bugatti. Others, not so much. They felt like a car like this should stay original, that changing it takes away from what makes it special, that you're erasing the heritage and the design language that Bugatti spent years perfecting. But here's the deeper question that nobody's really asking. What matters more in the long run? Preserving originality for the sake of tradition, or creating something new that reflects the owner's vision? Because this build is clearly choosing the second option, and that's what makes it stand out. That's what makes it polarizing. That's what makes it impossible to ignore. Now, while all of that is happening, there's another major challenge brewing in the background. One that doesn't get as much attention, but is honestly one of the most critical parts of the entire build: the radiators. And this part is genuinely one of the most overlooked but most important aspects of making this car functional again, because without proper cooling, none of this matters. The car won't run at full capacity. It won't reach operating temperature safely. It won't function the way it was designed to. And here's the crazy part. Instead of buying replacement radiators from Bugatti or sourcing OEM parts at an absurd markup, they decide to build them from scratch using available cores, custom fittings, aftermarket solutions, trial and error. And this is where things get real, because this isn't just skill anymore. This is a risk. This is betting everything on the idea that you can reverse engineer a cooling system for one of the most advanced cars ever made. Because if something goes wrong here, it's not just a failed part that you can swap out. It could affect the entire engine, the entire drivetrain, the entire car. Overheating means warped heads, blown gaskets, destroyed turbos, thousands of dollars in damage that could have been avoided. So they install everything, connect the lines, route the hoses, prepare to run the pressure test. And this is a moment everyone's been waiting for, because if it holds pressure, if the system is sealed and functional, that means they're close, really close to actually firing this thing up and seeing it run. They start the test, watch the gauges, listen for any hissing or irregularities, and for a second it looks good. The pressure is building. The system seems tight. And then air starts leaking from one of the connections. And just like that, everything pauses. The momentum stops. The excitement fades. Because that one leak, small as it might seem, changes everything. No coolant means no temperature regulation. No temperature regulation means no engine test. No engine test means no confirmation that all this work actually paid off. And this is where the reality hits hardest. Because no matter how much progress has been made, no matter how many obstacles have been overcome, moments like this remind you that this is still a rebuild without manufacturer support, without a safety net, without a guarantee. Every solution comes with uncertainty. Every step forward can come with 2 steps back. But here's the thing, and this is what keeps people watching. Even with that setback, progress is undeniable. The chassis is rebuilt and structurally sound. The interior is completely finished and looks stunning whether you agree with the design or not. The mechanical components are coming together. The car is closer than it's ever been to being whole again. And this is where the bigger conversation comes roaring back. Because now the question isn't just about the car anymore. It's about what this whole process represents in the larger world of automotive ownership and control. You've got one side saying this proves these cars aren't as untouchable as people think, that the right to repair should extend even to hypercars, that owners should have full control over what they purchase. Another side is saying this is exactly why manufacturers control everything, because one mistake at this level could be catastrophic, because not everyone has the skill to do this safely. And then there's a third group, maybe the largest group, just watching, enjoying the ride, and waiting to see what happens next without picking a side. Because at the end of the day, this build is doing something most people don't get to see. It's pulling back the curtain on an industry that thrives on mystery and exclusivity. It's showing what's really inside these machines, how things are actually made, how things can actually be repaired, and what happens when someone decides to do it their own way regardless of what the rule book says. And whether you think that's brilliant or reckless, you can't deny that it's compelling. So now the real question is this. Is this pushing car culture forward into a new era of transparency and independence? Or is it crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed, disrespecting the craft and the brand that built the car in the first place? Because depending on how you see it, depending on your values and your perspective, this is either one of the most impressive rebuilds ever documented or one of the most controversial. Either way, you can't ignore it. And more importantly, you can't stop watching it. Because every new development raises the stakes higher.